The first clause we look at is clause 3. And it basically says that ordinary hours of work may not exceed 45 in any week. And then it explains that if you work 5 days a week, this would imply that it would only be 9 hours a day. But if you work a six-day week, it would be 8 hours a day. If you compare the rule to the BCA, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the rule is the same. But I would like to draw your attention to a few definitions. The first one, if we're talking about ordinary hours of work, then there are 3 definitions that I would like you to look at. The first one is drive. The definitions are contained in Schedule 2 of your main agreement, and it says, drive includes all periods of driving, all periods during which the driver of a motor vehicle is obliged to remain at his or her post in readiness to drive, and any time spent by the driver in connection with the vehicle or its load. Now, I know this is not only the ordinary hours of work, but hours of work would therefore include, if you are a driver, all those periods. Physically driving the truck, all the periods in which you are required to remain with your truck, or any time that you spend in a status of readiness to drive. This is a thorn in the flesh for a lot of transporters, because we've dealt with quite a few companies that drive short distances from one depot to the other, but the waiting or the queue at each depot is so long that it takes them hours and hours and hours in a day. And it's difficult for these employers to understand that all of those hours need to be included in their wage packets. I would suggest to employers of this type of company to apply for an exemption, to say that this is a typical day and we need to have exemption from having to pay for all those hours. But if we look a little bit more closely, we are talking about the ordinary hours of work, and ordinary hours of work is defined as the hours of work prescribed in Clause 3, Subclause 2, or if by agreement between an employer and employee, the employee works a lesser number of ordinary hours, those lesser hours. This implies that although the maximum ordinary hours is 45 in a week, an employer may decide to make it only 40. But by deciding that, he would automatically force his own hourly rate upwards. To maybe explain it better, if you earn 1,000 Rand a week, then your rate per hour would be 1,000 divided by 45. But if you work a 40-hour week, then your hourly rate or your minimum weekly wage would not be 1,000 divided by 45 times 40. It would be 1,000 divided by 40, which would give you a higher rate per hour. The other definition I would like to read to you is the hours of work. Hours of work includes all periods of driving. See, that's where the definition of drive comes in handy. And any time spent by a driver, security officer, or any other employee on other work connected with the vehicle or the load, and all periods during which the employee is obliged to remain at his or her post in readiness to work when required to do so, but does not include any meal interval prescribed in terms of Clause 5, or any period in respect of which a subsistence allowance is payable to an employee in terms of Clause 36, if during such interval or period the employee does no work other than remaining in charge of the vehicle and its load, if any, or guarding the vehicle and its load, if any. So an employee who has to drive a long distance and stop over and sleep in the truck. Those hours would not count towards his hours of work that he needs to be paid for, but he will be paid a subsistence allowance.